Hi folks, and welcome to another edition of Zog Science. Today we're going to be beginning our study of organismal physiology with a little introduction to physiology. So the question is, what is physiology? Well, physiology is the biological processes and functions that an organism carries out in its totality. Now we're not going to be going into super amounts of detail, so you actually shall pass anatomy and physiology, or in this case just physiology. But there is a lot of detail and there is a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about. There are emergent properties, which are making a comeback. We haven't talked about those in a little while. And they are going to go up our different levels of organization. We've talked about cells before. We're going to get more into tissues, organs, and organ systems in this unit. And the form and function is intertwined, as we have discussed before. Particularly when we get into organs and organ systems, the forms absolutely inform the functions. So talked a little bit briefly about unicellular organisms. Those are going to be your prokaryotes as well as things like protists. At this level, all the processes and functions, or all the physiology, takes place at a cellular level, which makes sense. However, some of them have evolved to work with other individuals to increase efficiency, kind of showing us maybe the evolution of multicellularity, right? Kind of moving along that path. Prokaryotes are limited because they don't have any compartmentalization, so all of their physiology occurs in the same environment, right? The same pH, salt balance, all that kind of things. Eukaryotes have a more widely varied physiology because of membrane-bound organelles, so that's going to be things like protists, right? Protists tend to be a little bigger, tend to be able to do more things than maybe your bacteria. Now, multicellular organisms, here's where we're going to be spending the majority of our time when we talk about physiology. Fungi, kind of boring, not a lot going on. We'll talk about that. Plants are surprisingly interesting. They have a lot of things going on that you may not necessarily be aware of because, again, we don't really see it. Animals are pretty complicated. We'll be spending the majority of our time with animal physiologies, but we will also be going into plant physiologies, a little bit of fungus physiology. So for fungi, the reason why they're kind of boring is that they don't have a lot of cellular differentiation. So most of the physiology takes place on a cellular level. They do have lots of interactions with other organisms, which is where we're going to mostly see them. You can kind of see what the fungus body looks like. They have what are called hyphae, which we're going to get into just in a little bit. And what you see is that the hyphae are actually a part of both the underground and the reproductive structure. Which is kind of interesting and kind of shows you that they don't really have that differentiation. Now, there are two different types of hyphae, and hyphae are the network of filaments that make up the fungus body. This is a scanning microscope, or a light microscope of the hyphae, so you can kind of see what they look like. And there are two different types. You've got the septate, which are cells that are separated by a septum, or just like a little wall, and they're kind of compartmentalized. And so the nuclei are in their separate compartments. You can also have cenocytic, which is where the cells are fused into a single multinucleate structure. So the nuclei are kind of free-floating. There's not really a cell per se. It's kind of all one large cell. Kind of interesting stuff. And that's pretty much it for fungi. So let's step into plants. Plants do display cell differentiation. And they are organized at a tissue, organ, and kind of a simple organ systems level, and we'll get into each of those as we go along. So there are three different types of plant cells. We can have parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. And the parenchyma cells perform photosynthesis, so those are going to be your kind of leaf cells and other green cells that you might see. You've got your collenchyma. These cells tend to provide structure. And then you've got the sclerenchyma. These cells also provide structure. However, they have a special function, or a little bit more specialized function, which is that they produce lignin. The lignin kills the cells, but when it kills the cells, it actually makes the cells much stronger and much more rigid. And that is what allows them to perform their specific functions, is the fact that they are dead and non-living. Now, these three different types of plant cells can organize into three different plant tissues. We've got the dermal, which is the outside. These are going to be your specialized parenchyma. Includes things like the stomata and the cuticle. prevents desiccation. So the cuticle is a kind of a waxy coating that covers plants and prevents them from water loss. Then you've got your stomata, which are going to open and close in order to regulate whether or not gases can get in and out, CO2, oxygen, things like that. Then you've got your ground layer or ground tissues. This is kind of the middle layer. It's got all three different cell types. This is where photosynthesis takes place, where storage of food and support all are going to be taking place. And then finally, we've got our vascular tissues. Remember, these are only found in vascular plants, so not things like mosses. And this is going to be strictly for transport, and these are specialized structures, not necessarily cells, specialized structures called xylem and phloem. So let's take a look at xylem and phloem really quick because they are important. Xylem are what transport water. These are dead. So these are those sclerenchyma that have produced lignin. And you can see that there are kind of different types. You've got vessels or tracheids. They both do the same thing. They're all about transporting water via osmotic potential and adhesion and cohesion. So the water molecules sticking to each other, sticking to the sides of the xylem, and then being pulled along by osmotic potential. Then you've got the phloem. These are alive, and these are actually a little bit more active in what they do, and they're useful for transporting carbohydrates and other nutrients throughout the plant, particularly from the leaves where photosynthesis occurs to the rest of the plant. Then those tissues can be organized into the three plant organs. We've got leaves, which is where photosynthesis and gas exchange take place. We've got the stem, which is mostly for support and transport of materials. And then finally, you've got the roots, which are for support, anchoring the plant, because plants are sessile, they don't move, nutrient, and then water absorption. And each of these can be modified for different functions. So let's take a look at some different modified structures. We've got some different modified leaves. The tendrils, what they do is these are things like vines. So these are modified leaves that grab onto other structures in order to kind of support and hold the plant up. We can have storage. So these are succulents, which are members of the cactus family. And these leaves are modified to store extra water. So that way, when there is a long period of drought, they have enough water to be able to continue to do photosynthesis. We have what are called reproductive leaves, if that would go away. These are reproductive leaves. These leaves are a little bit different. They're not flowers. They are just modified leaves. And these leaves, what they do is that they actually kind of, once they've matured, they fall off the plant. And this is another succulent, another cactus plant. They fall off the plant, and then if they get buried, then they can grow into a new plant. Pretty interesting. These are bracts. These look like petals. You find these on things like chrysanthemums. And these these leaves, are used just like flowers are to attract pollinators. However, they're not flowers. These are modified leaves, and you can tell by looking at them that they look like a leaf. And then finally, spines on things again like cacti. You notice that cacti kind of have a lot of interesting adaptations, right? They live in a pretty extreme environment. These are modified leaves, and these are for defense. We can also have modified stems. So these are stolen of a strawberry plant, and these are kind of horizontal stems that spread out. And when they spread out, they can then send roots down into the ground and reproduce. They can actually reproduce and form new plants, and that would be asexual reproduction. These are rhizomes. These are underground horizontal stems, and then you can see that the vertical stems are coming off of those. Tubers are modified rhizomes or stolons. It could be one or the other, either above ground or below ground. And these are storage, so things like potatoes, those are modified rhizomes. And then finally, we've got bulbs. Bulbs are underground vertical stems, and they are for, again, transport of food. So you can see the storage leaves, right, of an onion. Those are modified leaves that are attached to a stem that is all growing underground. Finally, we can have modified roots. So you've got buttress roots. These roots basically are aerial roots. They're above ground, and they just are for support for very large and heavy trees. We can have pneumatophores, and pneumatophores are really interesting. These are for mangrove trees that live in kind of intertidal zones, and the places where they live, the soil doesn't really have a lot of oxygen, and so what happens is that the roots actually stick up above the water in order to absorb oxygen, so that way the roots can continue to do things like cellular respiration, because you still need that, right? And it's not like the roots are producing their own oxygen. So how are they going to get oxygen? Well, they stick up out of the soil, out of the mud, which is very oxygen poor. These strangling aerial roots are really cool. What happens here is that there's a plant that actually lands in the tops of the canopy in like a jungle, and it will begin to grow, and it will send its roots down, and it sends its roots all the way down to the ground. Those roots then grow, and it actually will eventually grow its tree on top of the original tree that it had landed on, and eventually it strangles by out shading, out competing that other tree, and then you're just left with a tree with a hollow inside. Really interesting. Prop roots, these are found in things like corn. These roots will grow, and the reason why is because corn is pretty top heavy, so these roots will actually grow down into the ground and help to stabilize the corn plant. And then finally, you've got things like radishes, storage roots. These are a little different from potatoes, although it's still the same idea. All right, and then finally, we've got our two kind of plant organ systems. You can have the shoot system and the root system, and these are not as complicated as something like, you know, the digestive system found in animals, but it's kind of like a simple organ system. So the shoot is the above ground portion of the plant, and it's involved in photosynthesis and reproduction, as well as, you know, transport and things like that. And then you've got the root system, which is found below ground, and it is there for nutrient and water absorption, as well as storage of foods. So that's all the information that we've got on plants, kind of a broad overview of them. Again, we'll be dealing with them a little bit along the way, kind of as we go through. Let's get into animals. Animals have a large degree of cell differentiation, lots of different types of cells doing lots of different types of things. Therefore, we get a lot of diversity in the tissues, organs, and organ systems that we find. And you can see that in the large amount of animal diversity, you know, just the sheer amount of differentness that you have with animals. There are 4 different animal tissue types. We've got epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissues, and we're going to talk about all 4 of those here today. Epithelial tissues line the insides and the outsides of the body, and there are several different types. We're not going to worry about what those different types are necessarily, but just know that the epithelial tissue is kind of things like, you know, what's on outside of your skin, or what's like in your stomach lining, things like that. In the inside of your mouth, that is a epithelial tissue. And it is separated from other tissues by a basal or base layer. That's the blue layer down here on the bottom. You notice that's pretty much the same for all of it, right? That's that basal layer or the base layer. Next, we've got our connective tissues. These provide structure and support. There are lots of different types of connective tissues. Bone, cartilage, blood is considered connective tissue. Adipose tissue, which is fat, ligaments, tendons, those are all different types of connective tissues. They're holding things together. There can be loose types, there can be, you know, more dense types, just a lot of different varieties with the connective tissues. Next, we've got the muscle tissues. These carry out movement both externally and internally. There's only 3 different types of muscle tissues. We've got skeletal muscle. These are kind of what you would consider like voluntary movements, so like your major muscle groups, you know, biceps, triceps, quads, you know, things like that. Then you've got your cardiac muscles. This is the muscle that is specifically a part of the heart. And then you've got the smooth muscles. These are usually associated with involuntary movements, such as peristalsis, so the movement of food down the esophagus and then through the rest of that digestive system. There are smooth muscles found in other locations as well, kind of surrounding organs. Your diaphragm would be a smooth muscle, things like that. Finally, we have nervous tissue, which is important for signaling, coordination, and control of the body. And there are 2 main cells. We've got neurons and glial cells. The neurons are actually what are doing the receiving and sending of signals. We will get into the nervous system in much more detail later on. And then we've got glial cells, which help to support neurons and sometimes can help kind of mediate the function of neurons, but in general, they're more there to kind of protect them, as well as just make sure they're getting the nutrients and everything that they need. All right, so those are the 4 different types of tissues, and those tissues are arranged into organs. The organs carry out specific tasks within a larger organ system. Some of the major systems are the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the excretory system. Now, those are not the only three systems. There are a lot more of them, and we'll be going through a lot of these different systems kind of as we progress through the rest of this unit. Organ systems, their goal is to carry out life functions as well as make sure that we are maintaining homeostasis. Remember, homeostasis is an internal balance, and so the nervous system is very important and key in that, as well as the endocrine system in terms of making sure that the proper signaling is taking place once a response is received to correct for that, to make sure that we are maintaining homeostasis. This is a total list of all the different animal organ systems: digestive, circulatory, respiratory, immune / lymphatic system, excretory, endocrine, reproductive, nervous, integumentary, skeletal, and muscular. We'll be dealing with almost all of them. Maybe the only one we won't specifically talk about is the integumentary and the skeletal systems. But we may get into those a little bit. We'll probably hit those along the way, but just not be into them super hardcore. Just a couple of final things. We're going to see these three things kind of repeat themselves as we go through the different organ systems. Exchange, whether that's nutrient exchange, gas exchange, whatever, occurs with the environment and with different fluids. And the way that this occurs a lot of times is by maximizing surface area. Remember, we talked about before that smaller cells have a larger surface area to volume ratio. So that's why cells have a size limit. We're going to talk about evolutionary adaptations that have come about that are specifically for maximizing surface area. And we'll get into that, especially when we get into the digestive system. Organisms are going to maximize their energy efficiency based on their environment. And they're going to have specific adaptations in order to make sure that they are either regulating their amount of heat in their bodies or regulating the amount of energy that they're using, all those types of different things. And it's all based on their environment, right? We just got done talking about evolution. And then finally, similar environments are going to lead to similar adaptations. And we're going to see these adaptations kind of repeat themselves based in certain environments. So I hope you're excited about physiology. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff, a lot of things that are going to be very pertinent to you, right? Because it's all of the stuff that's going on in your body. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.